We're giving Canadians the ability to give ourselves far more than any foreign government can ever take away. We can build big, build bold, build now, build one Canadian economy, build a better Canada for all and for all time.
Welcome back to Question Period. Done deal? After a highly anticipated First Ministers meeting this week and Prime Minister Mark Carney doubling down on his plans to, quote, build, baby, build, the premiers appear to be largely on side. On Friday, the government also introduced legislation to speed up and simplify the review process for projects of national interest. The opposition Conservatives, meanwhile, continue to demand a spring budget.
This Prime Minister already broke his promise of capping spending at 2%. Instead, he'll spend 8% and $500 billion of inflationary spending. Why don't the Liberals table a budget today and show Canadians exactly how much more economic vandalism they'll do than Justin Trudeau did?
Our Sunday strategy session is here to talk about that. Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and Director of Communications to the late Jack Layton. Corey Tonight was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. And Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst, as well as former Communications Director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. Hi, everybody. Hey, good to see you. Hi. So the theme of the week, at least nationally, Scott, was certainly about these big projects of national interest. No itemized list emerged from the meeting, but now we do have legislation that is supposed to accomplish that. What did you think of the kind of kumbaya vibes, and how much do you think it will actually inform what happens?
Well, it's got to inform something. I mean, because it was a remarkable tone. I mean, really, Doug Ford, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes out and gets MC tattooed on his forearm. Like, it's a love affair. Okay. So I think it's welcome. Obviously, it's the kind of momentum, if you're the Prime Minister, you want to create for yourself, a momentum of goodwill among decision makers at the federal level. Then you see the bill being tabled. So it does feel like they're angling to do things and do things quickly. It's left, I can tell you, a lot of people in the private sector is kind of leaving their heads spinning, though. They're wondering, okay, how do I get in on this? Like, is my project or something I'm going to be akin to? Is it going to get approved? When will these projects get approved? And then there is, of course, the political realities of dealing with communities, dealing with Indigenous communities, dealing with all sorts of other stakeholders. But I mean, right now, so far, just, a month or a month and a half into this government, you have to give the Prime Minister credit. He seems to be able to generate positive will and a sense of hope for speed almost everywhere he goes. And that is the word. It is over and over and over again. People are like, let's move, and let's move now. And he definitely seems to have the wind at his back.
I was in Saskatoon for that meeting, and I thought what kind of struck me, Corey, and Scott's right that there is a lot of goodwill at this point, not to say necessarily that continues with abandon or without impediment, but I felt like a lot of it was informed, at least in the interviews I conducted with premiers after, by a sense of relief that someone at the federal level was as focused on the economy as the premiers collectively, I think, or in the aggregate, hoped they would be. And it was really in contrast for them, and this is not meant as a slight, but as they conveyed it to us, in contrast to them of the last against the last Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you see going on. Like, whether this is true love with Carney or whether it's a rebound relationship that only looks good because the previous one was so dysfunctional and so terrible. I guess time will tell. But there is definitely, I think, relief and appreciation around that table to have somebody looking at the economy more seriously and being more consultative with the provinces, not just simply telling them what they should be doing and hectoring them around the environment and sort of DEI sort of sentiment. I had many folks there say that they spent more time in that meeting talking about the economy in that one meeting than in 7 years, 8 years around that table with the previous Prime Minister. I think there was just a deep disinterest in those issues under Trudeau, and so the fact that things have swung back the other direction, I think, is going to be good for the Canadian economy, and I think you're seeing that optimism about the change in focus from the other premiers.
I think what will be interesting, though, Kathleen, is kind of what Scott touched on, right? That there is a ton of goodwill, and there's certainly at the provincial level a lot of buy-in. But on the same day, you know, the head of the AFN, for example, the national chief came forward, and even with the verbiage that was being used around fast tracking, was concerned about a lack of consultation. Sean Fraser, the Attorney General, comes out on one day, says, oh, they don't have a veto, and then has to pull it back the next day and say, oh, wait, I should have rejected the premise of the question. Like, it's not necessarily as simple as the good vibes feel.
It's not just the good vibes, and while there's lots of optimism, it kind of feels like, you know, when you were auditioning in your high school play, right? Everyone's clapping for every performance, but as soon as that cast list goes up and who gets picked and who doesn't get picked, what project actually goes forward? Is it Wind West? Is it going to be the, you know, Port of Churchill? You know, and that's when the disappointment will set in. And even Prime Minister Carney himself said projects will fall by the wayside. It's a living list, but projects will fall off. And I think that like, it's nice to have the optimism now. I like the kumbaya. I like the good vibes. I want people moving in the same direction, but there will be disappointment when projects aren't chosen. I mean, Premier Houston has created some pretty slick videos and marketing around Wind West. How will that move forward? You know, and will it even move forward? And I think that the Prime Minister has to be careful of that and put some of the onus back onto the provinces. What work are they willing to do? I can't, you know, I keep on remembering 2015, you know, when Rachel Notley was elected as the NDP Premier of Alberta. She did a lot of heavy lifting in that province in terms of climate change and different kinds of policies in order to create the willingness to do something like actually build the first pipeline to Tidewater. You know, so the provinces are going to have to realize, and the Premier specifically, that they're going to have to do a lot of that heavy lifting too. It can't all fall upon the feds. He can have the enabling legislation in terms of the national interest legislation that they've tabled, but it's going to take a lot of work for the provinces to cooperate. We saw that with Eby already, that he's not budging, right? Premier Eby said, you know, he's in Japan right now, but still that he's not going to basically give a rubber stamp.
What about the dynamic in Parliament? Because, you know, a lot of what we talk about makes it seem like this is a majority, Scott. It's not. This week we saw the throne speech. Only the NDP really came out and said, hey, we're not willing to support this. It sort of went through a different type of vote that I won't go into the weeds on. But, you know, the people who were there from the Conservatives or the Bloc did not vocalize opposition. The way that they're framing this legislation is part and parcel with the breaking down internal trade barriers. Like, is that by design, do you think?
Yeah, I do. And listen, I'm still hung up on the whole comparison to High School Musicals that Kathleen was on about. Sounds like someone did not get cast as Cosette in, in grade 12. But I think, though, I don't think the tone and character of this House has gelled yet, because I see interesting possibilities. It does seem as though the Conservatives are willing to vote on some measures in favor of the government, which you would think almost instinctively they would not. And so I wonder if the Prime Minister is going to have the advantage, if he's willing, to you know, package legislation and or motions in the House in a way that divide and rally different sort of combinations of support, which puts them in a stronger position. So, I mean, I think they are moving forward. Obviously, they will be able to move forward on internal trade, and that's an important piece. But beyond that, I think they're going to be able to sort of tiptoe their way through the opposition. And it does leave them in a really strong position, despite the fact that it is technically a minority. But boy, it sure doesn't feel that way.
Well, even with the legislation that Scott mentions, like, they are packaging. Even they packaged with the middle class tax cut, removing GST from the homes that are new homes under a certain amount, and then also removing the consumer carbon tax, and then they've got the package on the big projects and the internal trade, Corey. What kind of position do you think that leaves the opposition in?
I think they're in a difficult position, but the reason is if you look at the polling numbers, if they were to force an election, Carney would do better, not worse. And if you think there were popularity issues with Pierre Poilievre during the election campaign, all the recent polling would indicate that they've gotten worse subsequent to the vote. So, you know, I think if we look back to when Harper had his minorities, or at various points under other minority governments, everyone's taking a look out the window at the polling and what's going on with the electorate, and whether or not there's any appetite for an election generally, and whether you would be better off if you had that election. So I think they're in a very strong position in terms of the government. That'll change and erode over time, I think, for some of the reasons that that Scott and Kathleen mentioned, which projects end up proceeding, which don't. There'll be complications along the way. But for now, Carney is still in this post-election honeymoon period. And I don't think anyone's going to want to have an election until he gets bruised up a bit. And that just hasn't happened yet.
Last word to you, Kathleen.
I think it was a bit of a tell this week, the fact that the opposition parties, the Conservatives and the Bloc, didn't want a recorded vote. I think that was actually pretty significant, that it basically says that they're going to give Prime Minister Carney a free pass for at least this part of the session. But listen, the rubber will hit the road next week. We're going to see some opposition day motions. It's very insider baseball stuff. But what are the Conservatives putting forward in terms of trying to gum up the works for the Liberals? So we'll see how it comes out of the week ahead.
We sure will. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Our Sunday strategy session with Scott Reid, Corey Tenike, and Kathleen Monk.